Sallie Ward was born of Kentucky's blue-blooded aristocracy at her maternal grandfather's house, Walnut Hall. Her father, Robert J. Ward, was regarded as a prince among men. He was as handsome as his daughter was lovely. Her mother was a member of the famous Flournoy family of France, whose fame was added to by their gallant participation in the American Revolution. The little pink and white bundle of beauty which came to these parents in the year 1827 was the first of 8 children and was named Sallie Ward. Sallie embodied an old Kentucky way of life, growing up in a Louisville mansion. When she came of the proper age, Sallie was sent off to a French finishing school in Philadelphia. The atmosphere of conventional elegance she found there was frequently enlivened by the dashing and spirited young beauty from Kentucky. On one occasion, she appeared unannounced and without warning, dressed head to toe in male attire, in the sanctum sanctorum of the boarding school girls. As they all fled with more haste than dignity, Sallie Ward's uncontrollable laughter revealed the true situation, and all the girls returned in admiration. For even in male attire, Sallie was exceedingly captivating. Graduating in 1844, Sallie began her remarkable series of social triumphs back home in the Ward mansion in Louisville. The setting was one fitting the young American princess. Her father at that time was Speaker of the Kentucky House of Representatives and enjoyed a substantial income from traffic in tobacco, cotton, and sugar in the New Orleans market. The balls and entertainments he arranged for his young daughter were grand events. Guests came from afar to accept invitations to the Ward home. They were received in 3 spacious parlors, connected by large folding doors. French doors of glass in the 3rd parlor led to a wondrous greenhouse, behind which was a conservatory that housed a pyramid of rare flowers reaching to the ceiling. Tall palms and camellias in tropical profusion were on all sides, and more than 100 birds of many species sang from the nearby aviary. In the center of the conservatory was a bubbling fountain and pool. The feasts were served on massive mahogany tables, laden with heavy silver plates and cut glass. In such a palace, Sallie ruled her kingdom. She was the Belle of the South. Sallie was tall, with a finely symmetrical form. Her feet and hands were aristocratically small and were ever immaculately groomed. Her voice was rich in the melodious fullness of its tones. She had a profusion of dark brown hair that flowed with the waves of the ocean. Her eyes were large, dark blue, and somewhat widely apart, and always dancing with the brightness of self-confidence. When she smiled, the lips of her large, well-formed mouth parted to expose even teeth of pearly whites. And most noticeable of all was her wonderful complexion. Her skin was of lily-white tint, with just enough natural color to make her complexion that of a child. But even the brightest diamond is improved by polish. Before it was socially acceptable, the Southern belle was among the first to use artificial means to enhance her natural beauty. It was commonly said her dark eyebrows were even more clearly marked. The shadows under her eyes were hand-painted to better set off the attractions of her eyes, and it was certain the roses of her cheeks were not entirely painted by the hand of nature. In those days, homemade blushes were rather uncommon, which is why, on one occasion, when Sallie had been a little too generous in her application, it caused a bit of commotion among the laboring men on 4th Street. One day, when she chanced to pass them by, one of the workers halted his work and exclaimed, "By God, painted." Undaunted and without the slightest change of color, Sallie Ward replied, "Yes, painted by God," and passed on. Sallie had fine taste in clothing and often introduced new and original styles of dress. Her silks, laces, and jewels would have graced a royal wardrobe and were the envy of all the young women of her day. And the foundation of all Sallie Ward's beauty laid in her big, generous heart. It was said she never spoke unkindly of or to any living creature. Her physical charms were combined with a rare intellectual wit. She frequently would state, "People overestimate my beauty and underestimate my intellect." In addition to her training at the most renowned finishing school of her day, as well as further study under private tutors, she enjoyed the education that came from extensive travel and association with the brightest minds everywhere. Her father's wealth enabled her to travel extensively, and wherever she went, her remarkable beauty and charm made an instant and lasting impression. In her youth, her summers were spent at White Sulphur Springs, Virginia, and the New Orleans Mardi Gras celebration was usually graced by her presence in the winter. She soon became known as the foremost of Southern belles. Her arrivals by boat in New Orleans port were treated as if she were royalty. People would line the banks of the Ohio and Mississippi to catch a glimpse of her. Music and art were ruling passions with her. She received her musical education in New Orleans under the guidance of a French operatic singer who was then playing in America. Her love for art was cultivated by travel in Europe. Sallie had the fortune of making several trips to Europe, where at every capital she was given a reception befitting a reigning American beauty, and was even presented at several European courts, including the Emperor of France, and was among the first of what the British referred to as a professional beauty. Of course, such a charming young woman was surrounded by an army of suitors, but none found favor in her eyes. That was until Bigelow Lawrence of Boston crossed her path. He was the son of the American ambassador to England, and being from the North, was different from most of the men Sallie Ward had met. An opulent wedding at the Ward family home in 1849 ensued, and the Southern suitors saw their Belle stolen away from them at the age of 22. But the fairy tale didn't last long, as the marriage was a doomed clash of cultures. Sallie Ward went as a bride to the Massachusetts home of her husband, with her wardrobe of 50 dresses, and immediately found herself unsettled by the chill of her new critical and unsympathetic surroundings. She was accustomed to admiration from all those she came into contact with, something that was a distant memory in the North. Lawrence's friends and family were prone to criticize her free-handed and open-hearted manners, and her low-necked and short-sleeved gowns were remonstrated by her husband. It all came to a head when Sallie decided it was about time to lighten the environment with one of her infamous pranks. Sallie Ward was to appear at a ball dressed in undergarments. She looked wondrously bewitching in her white satin bloomers, with her soft hair piled into a crown of glory upon her well-poised little head, and upon her feet a bejeweled pair of Persian slippers. Her entrance was all she hoped for it to be, and more. There was one vast gasp, and the in-laws stood frigid. Sallie scanned the room, eagerly looking for one pair of friendly eyes to understand, but there were none. She was ordered to immediately retire and return properly dressed. She did not return. She tore off the white satin bloomers, and her next change was a traveling dress, in which she returned to Kentucky, where, even as a divorced woman, she resumed her station as the Belle of the South. Several years passed in comparative quiet after her return from Boston, until 1852, when the largest fancy dress ball ever thrown in the South was given in her honor. Guests were invited from all over the country. Sallie was the belle of the ball, appearing in pink satin, her bodice embroidered with diamonds. Finishing off the look were matching dainty pink slippers and pearls braided throughout her hair. After supper, Sallie appeared in an entire new ensemble, wearing a white dress dotted with silver and white boots with silver anklets. After this, it was the standard for women to wear several dresses during a fancy ball. The young woman was surrounded by admirers who eagerly sought her hand, and she basked in the attention. With her quick wit and bright mind, she acquired quite a reputation for being a brilliant conversationalist. She said and did things differently. She was the first woman in Louisville to use opera glasses, which attracted more attention than the performers when she appeared with them in a box at the theater one night. Her many talents extended beyond indoor activities. She was just as much at home on the back of a prancing Kentucky thoroughbred as she was gliding across a ballroom floor. She rode horses with a dash and skill well becoming a daughter of the bluegrass state. Her daring on horseback led her into many escapades which would have been condemned in any other woman. But with Sallie Ward, they were approved and applauded. Legend has it she rode her horse up the front steps of the fashionable hotel of her day, the Galt House, whirled him around the lobby, bowing to the startled guests, and returned to the street. She certainly loved daring, and on another occasion, while out riding with one of her many gentlemen callers, they happened to stumble upon the old market house. The building was set up as an open passageway from one end to the other. Deviously daring her companion to follow her, Sallie dashed impulsively through the market house. Not to be outdone, her companion dashed after her. His reward, a $50 fine for their little rendezvous. The next day, when the young man went to pay the penalty, he learned Sallie had quietly settled the matter. The next gentleman to catch Sallie's eye was Dr. Robert Hunt of Lexington, the first millionaire west of the Allegheny Mountains. Robert was described as one of the most elegant and polished gentlemen of the day. The two were married in 1852 and soon went to live in New Orleans, which at the time was the capital of Southern gaiety and fashion. The union was exceedingly happy, and the years Sallie spent among the wealthy French and Spanish planters as Mrs. Hunt were among the most pleasant of her life. Sallie swept into the social scene of the Crescent City in style. She and her husband lived on a scale of magnificence that suited her luxurious taste. Their home on Rampart Street was richly adorned with tapestries, statuary, and Parisian furnishings. Their conservatory was beautified with a marble court, glistening fountains, and a wealth of tropical bloom. A perfect setting for Sallie's legendary dinner parties, during which a French orchestra would play, filling the courtyard and dining room with its melodies. On a visit to New Orleans, George Peter Alexander Healy, who was famous for painting all the beauties from the European courts, found himself enchanted by the charming American. He did Sallie's portrait, which he proudly hung in his studio. He was accustomed to pointing to it and rapturously insist it portrayed the most beautiful and elegant woman to ever live. With her husband, Mrs. Hunt made 2 trips to Europe and further added to her fame as an American beauty. 2 sons were born to the union, John and Robert, and a daughter, Emily. Only John survived to adulthood, who lived in New York City until his death. This marriage ended more bitterly than our first. It could not withstand the turmoil inflicted by the Civil War. as Dr. Hunt aligned himself with the Confederacy, while Sallie was a staunch supporter of Lincoln. The headstrong Sallie packed her bags and retreated to Louisville. Estranged, Dr. Hunt died in 1867, following a drunken fall from a second-floor window. Back in Louisville, Sallie took up residence in an apartment at the Galt House, where she would live until her death. After a period of widowhood, Sallie's unexpected remarriage in 1876 produced the headline, "Sensation in Society." Her third husband, Veen P. Armstrong, was a wealthy local meatpacker who lived only a short time after their marriage. In 1885, Sallie married, for the final time, George F. Downs, a wealthy merchant. Up until a few years before her death, Sallie continued as a leader in Louisville society. People would watch for Mrs. Downs to drive to Upa's hair store, or to another where bolts of silks and satins were brought out to her signature lavender carriage. No entertainment was complete without her presence, and the famous beauty acted as chaperone for the younger generation of Kentucky belles. Sallie's hair retained its rich brown color until the last, and no wrinkles ever appeared to mar the beauty of her remarkable complexion. The last 2 years of her life were passed almost entirely in the privacy of her apartments. She communicated with friends by writing notes on fine lavender paper, bearing the letter D as a monogram, sealed with wax and stamped with the same letter. Although blue had been her favorite color in youth, shades of violet, lavender, and purple appealed to her most in her later years, and accordingly, all her bonnets and gowns were in the color. Sallie had very particular taste, and this extended to everything she did. So when she saw the end in sight, leaving nothing to chance, Sallie Ward planned her own funeral. She commissioned a white satin shroud and ordered her head to be draped with a rare family heirloom lace. As requested, she was buried in a lavender casket lined with white satin. Her funeral was held in the chapel of St. Mary Magdalene Church, presided over by Father Louis Deppen. As a final farewell salutation, Ave Maria was serenaded over the proceedings. Afterward, her funeral cortege wound its way to where she would be buried, in the Ward lot of Cave Hill Cemetery. As she had in life, Sallie Ward went out in style.